YouTube channel. Today we have Neil Mottinger here with us, and let me just do one little comment at the beginning. The reader card that Neil uses to log into his JPL accounts is not working. So the backup is you've pulled down items from the internet. So this is not exactly what Neil had put together. It is. Oh, it is. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. But there's more in the PowerPoint because I've seen pieces of the PowerPoint. So several interesting factoids about our friend Neil Mottinger. First, many of us here at the Grove know Gary Demarest. And Gary sent Neil over to the young adults group over at Hollywood Press, and that's where Neil met his wife. So thank you, Gary, if you're watching, for that recommendation. Neil's been blessed as a result of that. So, member at Lacaniata Press for many, many years, still, and at the same time has been at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, working with NASA for 56 years. Now, your friend, Tom McGinnis, said, when I told him that, he said, well, that's about the same time that the universe was created. And you've been studying it ever since its origins. So anyway, we look forward to this fantastic presentation. I've seen pieces of it already. And I want to thank you in advance for heeding God's call in your life to use your passion, your wisdom, and the incredible mind that God gave you to learn about the universe and instruct us this afternoon. So please welcome our friend Neil Mottinger.
There we go. Yeah. Well, out of boy, the guy at the soundboard can give whoever's the preacher all kinds of feedback. Not that that ever happens, of course. Well, of all the things that Terry mentioned, how about 2 out of 3? They say the mind is the second thing to go, and I can't remember what the first one is. And you're all too young to appreciate much of this, but just the other day, my check knee light turned on. And when I order things on the internet, I have to use a drop-down menu to find my birth date. And I might as well spill the beans. I married an older woman. She's a year older than me and experiencing some of these things. And she said the other day her mother showed up in her mirror. But just remember, you're as young as your dreams and as old as your fears. So just keep dreaming. It's an honor to be invited back. I also should mention, we've all had COVID tests out our ears, or well, nose, but, and I've had a number of them too. They were all negative and vaxxed and boosted and all that stuff, but some of them were offered at church, and one test came back with this most amazing results. It just can't believe it. It said, I'm a carrier of intelligence. I'm asymptomatic. Not that I don't take this seriously, but if we don't laugh, we're not going to last. Amen. And I try not to laugh during the sermons, so Judy and all those, you can. I just pass funny notes and I write strange things on the Moment of Friendship pad. I sang in the choir for quite a while until Kemp couldn't play the notes that I sing. And we would do the Moment of Friendship pass the Moment of Friendship pad. One time we had done something by Handel, I guess. And so I wrote GF Handel, I really like the music you do here. And about 3 days later, I got a call from the church. We're trying to get a phone number for G.F. Handel. Let's see, what was it I was going to talk about here? Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you why I'm trying to hold these. I had a question I was going to ask you folks, and now I can't remember what it was. I've been a navigation engineer at JPL for 56 years. I grew up on a small family farm southwest of Chicago, Joliet, Illinois. You know, Al Capone put that place on the map. He worked at the cement shoe factory there. And my mother arranged for me to look through a small 4-inch homemade telescope when I was a junior in high school. And wow, looking at the craters on the moon, my puddle got a lot smaller. So I majored at school and nearly flunked computer programming in summer school and went on academic probation the start of my senior year. And that was the best thing that ever could have happened to me. I'm very liberal in saying it has to be divine intervention that got me into JPL. I can't believe the caliber of people I have to work with. I guess the only thing I can attribute to is my mother's philosophy in the 4th grade schoolroom. Try. If you need help, then ask for it. Do more than expected. And character counts, I guess. So I kind of backed into JPL, although I try to walk in the front door. I thought maybe, you probably think that science involves really sophisticated equipment. You know, you're all aware of rovers on Mars, and we've been flying a helicopter on Mars. But we've also looked at the craters on Mars with some of the spacecraft that orbit their planet. There's one that can see the tracks that the rovers leave in the sand from orbit. It has a very powerful camera on it. And it's not uncommon to see gullies in the craters. Some of the gullies have a alluvial fan at the bottom. You know, they washed a lot of dirt down. We're living on an alluvial fan here. You know, how far can you go before you hit rocks? About that far. But some of these gullies just had a pit at the bottom, kind of a hole, no alluvial fan. Now this was in craters above which on the rim dry ice would form in the Martian winter, and there would be big blocks of dry ice. So scientists here at JPL went out to Mojave Desert. They took 3 things with them to try to explain the gullies on Mars. They got 2 of them at Smart and Final. The other one they got at Anna Walt Lumber, or maybe they took it off the side of somebody's house. They took a block of wood, a block of water ice, and a block of dry ice. Judy already knows the answer, don't you? Oh, you're just... It still works, yep. Still works, yep. Okay, so a block of wood, a block of water ice, and a block of dry ice, and we're going to go sit on the side of a sand dune out in the Mojave Desert that has a 30-degree slope, which is about the angle of a lot of craters on Mars. And now that I've just told you about my programming skills with computers, I'm going to try to make this thing talk about that experiment out there in the Mojave Desert.
We were looking at these strange features on Mars. They're what we call linear gullies because they're long troughs. They can extend up to 2 kilometers, which is just over a mile. And they're really strange because they go down and then they end abruptly in a pit. debris apron because stuff has been moved from the top to the bottom. But these don't have the apron, they just have a pit at the end. So we were wondering how they could form. Frozen carbon dioxide accumulates on the surface. And we think that some of this accumulation will compress down and actually form ice slabs and ice blocks. We bought some frozen carbon dioxide, dry ice blocks, and we took it out to a dune slope and we put it down and we saw what happened. Most dune slopes will be at 33 degrees, and that's a nice steep slope. And so we did it with a water ice block, and the sand got wet and it didn't move, and we did it with a wooden block.
But we didn't expect it to just move and move and move and move and keep moving all the way to the bottom. But even on the other side of the dune, which is more like 6 degrees, it's very shallow. We put the block on and we pushed it and it would just slide right down. And the only reason it stopped is because it hit the bushes at the bottom. Dry ice, as it heats up, turns into gas. It pushes against the sand as it comes out. After a few hours, it's scooped out a nice little area, and so you have a feature that looks like what we see on Mars. They will move down that dune slope and carve out a shallow trough. When the block of ice is on the sand surface, that sand is just a little bit warmer, and so it causes a cushion of air to form. And that lifts that block just a little bit, so when it moves forward, it's like it's lubricated, and it can just slide very easily. Then when it got to the bottom, instead of just sitting there, it would disappear as the area heated up, and then that could possibly leave a pit. I'm looking forward to the day when astronauts can engage in a whole new area of extreme sports. They could snowboard down these carbon dioxide covered dunes on a cushion of carbon dioxide. They would just shoot right down those slopes. It would be amazing.
And you thought science was sophisticated. This is definitely something you can try at home. I'm sure they have a lot of dry ice over in the kitchen, in the freezer. You could get a block, and maybe you could find a slope somewhere around here, or maybe you could try sliding down Peter and Elaine's roof or something and see if that would work. We flew a rover to Mars in the midst of COVID. We all worked from home. It launched from Florida in July of 2020. Somehow they managed to get that thing across the country and put together and not get sick and launch it successfully. And since charter communications did not go down for very long, we were able to navigate that thing from home and land on Mars on February 18th, 2021. It's collected samples on Mars. It has a drill and it has tubes like this. We've collected 10 samples. We landed in a crater that used to be a lake. Several billion years ago, it was a lake, and there's a huge delta in that crater. The water washed in. Think of the Mississippi River. If Gulf of Mexico dried up, you're going to see this huge delta. Well, we flew into the same thing on Mars, and we're looking probably for evidence that microbial life could have existed. We think the evidence of life we would find would be indicative of what we saw on the Earth 3 billion years ago, too. If you want to look for life, you could start with this. Just turn the camera on and see if anything walks by. We tried that with one lander back in 76, but seriously, we're looking for evidence of microbial life, and we're drilling samples and putting them in a tube like this. We've collected 10 samples in front of this delta in the crater. Now we're driving up on the delta. We've already collected, I think, 2 more samples up there. We're going to collect about 2 more on top of that. The first 10 we left in a depot, a parking lot on Mars, if you will, where there was no Home Depot. And the plans are that sometime in the 2030s, we're going to go back with a lander And we're going to land next to the rover, and we're going to transfer these tubes from the rover to the lander. And inside the lander is a rocket, big rocket, 8 feet long maybe. And we're going to launch that rocket with these in a carousel inside into Mars orbit. Well, for starters, this lander is not a launch pad. You all remember the Apollo spacecraft leaving the moon, you know, they launched off what they landed on. Well, as we've all seen, launching can be kind of spectacular, watching what Starlink or Star something or other of Elon Musk did the other day. So since we don't have a really strong platform, the next best thing to do, just throw the rocket in the air, and then it will ignite and go into Mars orbit, where the European Space Agency will have an orbiter waiting, and we will transfer this carousel of tubes to the orbiter and bring it back to Earth. They want to land out here in Utah Test and Recovery Range. Big international cooperation. If I had any skill with Photoshop, I would take a picture of this, and right next to it, I think I'd put a picture of a Tootsie Roll or something, you know. But maybe that's just me. I've gotten way ahead of the story. The rover that landed in February of 2021 also carried a helicopter with it. We wanted to see if we could fly a rotocraft on Mars. Now there's a couple of minor problems. The first one is the Mars atmosphere is equivalent to the Earth's atmosphere at 100,000 feet. It's 1%. Now I know you folks are very observant. If you've ever seen a helicopter fly by and you count how fast it's going around, you come up with about 500 RPM. On Mars, well, maybe some of you got 498, but it's about the same. On Mars, we have to spin 5 times as fast. We have a space simulator at the lab. It's a 25-foot diameter cylinder that's about 75 feet tall, and we can pump that down to the equivalent Mars atmosphere. And when they were developing the helicopter, they had some test models that they put in there, and they brought in an experienced helicopter pilot. He couldn't fly it. Things are happening so fast. And this is just like a helicopter on Earth. It duplicates everything, all the controls, the way helicopters work, the way the blades tilt to control direction stuff. It's identical to that, except it weighs 4 pounds. The blades are about 4 feet. They weigh as much as 6 quarters. There's 2 of them. They spin in contra-rotating directions. This was to be a demonstration. Will it work? The first flight, we went 4 meters in the air, turned a little bit, and came down. Unbelievable success, all completely autonomous. This is not a video game. For one thing, it can take anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes for a radio signal to get from Earth to Mars. So it has to be able to control the flight all by itself. The next big challenge, it gets incredibly cold at night on Mars, so this little thing has to keep itself warm. Has a little tiny solar panel on top that generates power from the sunlight. We're very careful to fly when there isn't much wind on Mars. Wind can be a factor. And the thought was we will have a month to see if we can fly this thing 5 times. It has nothing to do with the science. On the rover, we're just going to see if we can fly. It nailed it. And now it's a scout. It has flown, I think, 52 times. It has flown over sand dunes and things that the rover couldn't begin to dream of driving through. It would get stuck for sure. It's become a scout for the mission. So the people that were going to go there in the 2030s and retrieve these things, some of which may be just laying on the ground, they're going to take 2 helicopters with them. And they're going to modify those helicopters a little bit. They're going to put wheels on them. They'll rotor over to where the tubes are, and maybe they'll motor a little bit, fall off the edge like I just almost did. and pick up those tubes and fly them back to the lander and get them back on their way to Earth. So, some of the more recent things, now that we've done all the exciting stuff we can do with a block of dry ice, it's time for some more exciting stuff. So we want to get a brief description of what Ingenuity was doing and talk a little bit about these helicopters that we're going to take there to retrieve the tubes and get them on their way back to Earth. If I can find all this. Ah, here we go. I'm incredibly in debt to Edgar and your audiovisual team here.
2 years ago, Ingenuity proved that we can do the impossible. We can fly on Mars. Let's talk about what's next.
Here at the Surface Robotics Lab, testing is being done on future Mars helicopters. Teddy Sanatos is here with us today to talk about the helicopter that started it all, Ingenuity. Teddy, what's the latest?
Ingenuity is doing great. Our baby's still flying on the surface of Mars. After 2 Earth years, 1 Mars year of total flight, racked up 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles of total distance flown. Our
We landed over here, drove around here a lot, flew the helicopter over some of these dunes, and then we came over this way, and now we're going to go on top of the dunes. And today, the rover is sitting up here. But this little guy that weighs 4 pounds, and you can see the 2 propellers and the solar panel on top have performed admirably.
Our rotor system, our little cell phone processor.
This is the real thing, sitting on Mars, taken with a camera on the rover. You can see the solar panels, the 2 rotor blades, all the mechanism that make this a helicopter. The control box down here, they used a processor out of a cell phone. This was kind of low budget. And lithium batteries.
Processor on board, our off-the-shelf lithium-ion batteries are all doing fantastic. One area that we're looking very closely at is our solar panel. You can imagine after 2 years of flying on the surface of Mars, you'll get some dust. We still have ample margin and ample energy to keep up our flight operations and the extended mission of continue to scout and push the flight envelope of what's possible. The testing being done in this room is part of the next helicopter mission to Mars called the Sample Recovery Helicopters. The goal is to be a backup to get these samples back to Earth. Put simply, Perseverance collects the sample tubes, the sample return lander will retrieve those samples directly from Perseverance, and then there's a rocket inside of that lander that's actually going to send those samples back to Earth. As a backup to getting those sample tubes from Mars back to the lander, we're designing the next generation of helicopters to not only be able to pick up and carry a sample tube, but also drive around on the surface.
Are there any other ways Ingenuity is influencing future Mars exploration?
We're looking at a research concept called Mars Science Helicopter. It's a hexacopter, so 6 rotors in a ring around a central structure. It's about the size of the rover, and you can imagine in the future you will have fleets of these Mars Science helicopters flying around, bringing important payloads to areas of Mars that we've never been able to access before.
What's next for Ingenuity?
So we're trying to fly faster, trying to fly higher. We've added new flight software capabilities. We can now detect
Images, there are 2 cameras on Ingenuity. One of them is kind of watching where they're going. The other one's pointing straight down. But the images from those are also used as part of the real-time flight processing. In fact, it's sophisticated now, it can find a safe place to land all by itself. We don't have to check with the Auto Club.
landing sites airborne. Those sorts of winds are coming from the surface of Mars directly into the design of the new sample recovery helicopters. And she's done a fantastic job. Surpassed any sort of metric of success that anyone on the team could have ever imagined for this little tiny 4-pound spacecraft.
To get the latest updates on Ingenuity, follow at NASA JPL and at NASA Mars on social media, or take a deeper dive on the mission websites at mars.nasa.gov.
You know how it is on the internet. Once you get started, there's almost no telling where it's going to end up. So those were some of the exciting highlights of that little 4-pound helicopter, which does all this by itself. We're kind of going to back up now. Landing on the surface of Mars is not easy. You come in flying between 12 and 13,000 miles an hour, which is a little faster than the average speed on the 210. And there's just enough atmosphere. We talked about how thin that Mars atmosphere is and the challenge it presented the helicopter. But paradoxically, if you ignored the atmosphere, it would French fry your spacecraft, even if you had a heat shield on it. Well, a heat shield will kind of help, but you couldn't make it without it, but you can't ignore the atmosphere or it will incinerate the spacecraft. So we kind of start with a heat shield. And more recently, starting with Curiosity, which landed back in 2012, we fly the same kind of a path through the atmosphere that the space shuttle used to fly as it would return from the Earth. The rover knew where it wanted to land on Mars, where we wanted to touch down. We as navigators were bound to tell the rover where it was at the edge of the atmosphere. And then it's going to fly a path autonomously to try to minimize the heating, dissipate some of that heat, deploy a parachute when it gets down slow enough for a supersonic parachute. 200 miles an hour is still a little fast to land. So we're going to have a rocket platform. We call it a sky crane that has the rover nestled up and underneath it. We're going to release that from the parachute, step aside so we don't fly back into the parachute. And now we've gotten rid of the heat shield, and the radar and the cameras on the rover can see the ground. And we have maps from photos taken by the orbiters of the craters around where we want to land. And with a technique called terrain relative navigation, which is different than having a backseat driver, we're going to take pictures while we're coming down. We're going to compare them with the catalog of pictures we brought with us from home. And if the images aren't where they ought to be for the right path to the landing spot, then this rocket platform is going to deviate and get us back on track, so we'll land next to where we need to be. See, there's a paradox. Engineers want to get the rover on Mars safely. Obviously, if you have a pile of metal, sometimes called an unplanned disassembly, there's not too much science you can do. So you want to land in a safe place. Well, the safe place may be so far from where the science is, as was in the case for Curiosity, that you have to drive for maybe a year before you can even get to where the science, most interesting science starts. So they wanted to land inside this crater next to that delta. And they had all kinds of maps of where all the rocks were. We tested this out in Death Valley. We put the same software on a helicopter and kind of tested flying in Death Valley just like we would on Mars. When all was said and done, we landed within 5 meters of the planned target. That's about 16 feet, maybe, and it was a safe spot. We had some more cameras actually there's a back shell, kind of a protective cover over the rover in this rocket platform. We had a camera on that looking up, and for the first time ever, we saw a supersonic parachute deploy on Mars. It's very hard to duplicate that here on Earth. Maybe you can put the parachute on a rocket, shoot it up in the air, point the rocket back to the Earth, and try to deploy a parachute, but you're always kind of wondering, how does it really work on Mars? Now we've got video of a supersonic parachute deploying on Mars. I'm going to show you some of that. Now this rocket sky crane thing that we're tucked up underneath, we really don't want to land with that right on top of us because it's going to stir up a lot of dust. And you think dust bunnies are bad here on Earth, stirring up all that dust on Mars would not be too good for the rover. Well, there's a simple solution. Just lower the rover on 60 feet of rope. And when it touches the ground, cut the rope and let the sky crane fly off to itself. Child's play, right? We've done it twice now. We don't know if we're lucky or good. But so now we're going to play a recording that was taken during the real-time entry, descent, and landing is what they call all that stuff. Everything has an acronym, right? MVGH. Hey, I got clear to the fourth letter. And we'll see the parachute actually deploy, and then we will be looking up at the rover while the rover is looking down on, while the sky crane is looking down on the rover as we're lowering on these ropes. And all during this will be narrated on our way to the ground.
Fly right maneuver, where the spacecraft will jettison the entry balance masses in preparation for parachute deploy and to roll over to give the radar a better look at the ground.
Indicate chute deploy.
The navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration in the velocity. Our current velocity is 440 meters per second at an altitude of about 12 kilometers from the surface of Mars.
Heat shield set.
Perseverance is now slowed to subsonic speeds and the heat shield has been separated. This allows both the radar and the cameras to get their first look at the surface. Current velocity is 145 meters per second at an altitude of about 9.5 kilometers above the surface.
Nav filter converge. Velocity solution 3.3 meters per second. Altitude 7.4 kilometers.
Now has radar lock on the ground. Current velocity.
On the way down and comparing them with the catalog and the correction that's needed. Here you're beginning to see a little bit of an outline of the delta.
It is about 100 meters per
6.6 kilometers above the surface. Perseverance is continuing to descend on the parachute. We are coming up on the initialization of terrain relative navigation and subsequently the priming of the landing engines. Our current velocity is about 90 meters per second at an altitude of 4.2 kilometers.
LVS valid.
We have confirmation that the lander vision system has produced a valid solution and part of terrain relative navigation.
Timing. TBA is nominal.
We have timing of the landing engines.
Back shell set.
Current velocity is 83 meters per second at about 2.6 kilometers from the surface of Mars. We have confirmation that the back shell has separated. We are currently performing the divert maneuver. Current velocity is about 75 meters per second at an altitude of about a kilometer off the surface of Mars.
Here in safety Bravo.
We have completed our terrain relative navigation. Current speed is about 30 meters per second, altitude of about 300 meters off the surface of Mars. We have started our constant velocity accordion, which means we are conducting the sky crane, about to conduct the sky crane maneuver. Sky crane maneuver has started. about 20 meters off the surface.
looking down, and this is the rover looking up. I'm vice versa. Oh, well. That's why I don't do landings.
Receiving signals from MRO. Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the sands of past life.
Yeah. Are we lucky or good? I don't. That's the second time we've done that.
I'm Sunny Williams.
Oops.
I'm up here on the International Space Station.
So this is Node 2. This is a really cool mod.
So I think now that we know how to get to Mars and we're collecting these samples, bringing them back is the next step. How many single point failures do you think there are in something like that? We tossed the rocket in the air.
How did they do that?
Very carefully. I don't know for sure if it's going to be, my guess would be springs as opposed to compressed air. In the meanwhile, the rover is looking for evidence of microbial life on Mars, and what better place than the mouth of a river. I have some handouts at the table in the back. You're welcome to take all those. You've paid for them already, so you might as well take them. The Perseverance nav team also had these commemorative navigation pens made, which you believe in hard copy. You write things down. There's a stylus on the end for your smartphone. Every morning I make a list of what I want to do that day. I feel like I'm at loss if I don't have a list. The last thing I put on the list, take me with you. I don't know how many days I've walked off leaving that list at home. I also have a free email service. I've watched the internet for things that are of interest to me in space anyway. And when I find a bunch of them, I send them out to my space enthusiasts, some of which are seated in the front row here. I checked them for soft fruit earlier. And there's a yellow tablet over there. If you would print your email clearly, I'd be happy to put you on that list. There's no set schedule for doing this. And I use a blind distribution. There's over 370 excited civilian friends like you in space that are on that list. And I use a blind distribution, so your email is protected and you don't get 370 million reply alls. Sign up for that if you're interested. Gary Demarest is on the list, and Judy and Jane and Judy, yeah, Mutt and Jeff or something like that. Elaine is on that list, and Peter, and we're still friends. And with that, Barbara and Dick too. Yeah, we miss you in the choir. Yeah. You may have stopped listening long before I quit talking, but in that case, I'll be happy to entertain questions, comments.
Without carbon dating, how is it possible to estimate when something has happened on Mars, how long ago it was?
The delay to here?
No, I mean to date when something has happened on Mars.
Yeah, right.
How do you calculate that time?
Yeah. We know the distance from the Earth to Mars as a function of time. We know how fast light travels. So you divide the distance by the speed, and then you get the delay in seconds. And that varies depending upon the Earth-Mars distance. It can be as short as 5 minutes. It can get up to 20 minutes. Right now, I think it's around 13. I'm working on a Mars orbiter, and we're always wondering, how long does it take a signal? Was that your question?
Yes, it does partly. But I'm interested in something you said early in the talk about something that happened on Mars so many million years ago. Without carbon dating, how do you know something happened on Mars that long ago?
We have a pretty good idea when the solar system formed, and there's massive evidence when you look at pictures returned from orbiters that there has been water on Mars, massive amounts of water. And the Earth and Mars are very similar. We call them the terrestrial planets because there's a hard surface. They're rocky planets like Venus and Mercury, whereas when you get to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, those are gas giants, ice giants. They're big balls of gas. There is no solid surface that you could walk on. So Earth and Mars are very similar, and there is abundant evidence of what flowing water does. My sister and I failed to get into Yellowstone last summer because of the epic flood, so we went to the Teton National Park. Not a bad second. Motel 6, $350 a night, but hey, we're only going to stay a month, you know. So we're driving up through the Tetons on the Snake River overlook. I'm looking west towards the Tetons. I thought I was looking at Mars. Around the corner from my office, there's a 30-foot mosaic of the front of that delta in Jezreel Crater. I can't tell the difference. Now, Curiosity, which also landed in a crater that had been a lake at one time, took a picture of a formation on Mars that has an equivalent in Scotland. And that formation was examined by Joseph Hutton in the late 1800s, and it's become the foundation of modern geology. This point southeast of Edinburgh is called Sychar Point. And to the casual observer, it's a kind of an interesting bunch of rocks, but when you look at it really carefully, there's two distinct formations or characteristics of this rock. The first thing you see is older gray rock that's vertical. But the trouble is, it's sandstone rock. Sandstone rock only forms horizontally when you're in a lake or an ocean or something like that. So here's vertical sedimentary rock. On top of it, lighter color, red color, is horizontal sedimentary rock. And he thought about this. And he realized that that older rock was formed, indeed, when it was horizontal, by an ocean that probably doesn't exist anymore. And then with tectonic forces raising, now all of a sudden that sedimentary layer is vertical. Now there's another ocean or lake on top of that laying down another sedimentary layer. This doesn't happen quite overnight, even if it's leap year. It takes millions, if not billions of years. One of the websites I follow, if I may say religiously, in your presence, is Astronomy Picture of the Day. This Sychar Point is, Curiosity took a picture of the same kind of rock on Mars. And it's been called Sychar Point because of this paradox of formation of sedimentary rock. There was also a fantastic video there done by the British Geological Society talking about this Sychar Point, and they actually annotated and drew on pictures of that rock, these very specific areas. So Google Sychar Point. And the thing that struck me so when I was on the Snake River, here I am looking at the Jezreel, but it's on Earth. Moving water does the same thing wherever it is. And the Earth and Mars are the only place that we have overwhelming evidence there was water. Venus is so hot at the moment, it would have boiled it all away, but who knows in this greenhouse. And it's hard to know if there could have been water on that. I won't rule it out. Mercury is pretty close to the sun. Maybe there was water there too, but there's just this huge similarity, and we figure these inner planets probably all formed about the same time. There's an abundance of questions. Where did all the water come from? Some theories think it was comets that impacted the Earth and Mars brought the water. Kind of an enigma. Does that help or just confuse you? Yes, ma'am.
What's your understanding is where did the water go and why?
There were a lot of Martians and they were awful thirsty.
They drank their glasses per day.
One thing for openers, water vapor, the speed of a water vapor molecule can exceed the escape velocity of Mars. So it will just leave due to its own velocity. That might get rid of some of it. We see with telescopes polar caps on Mars that are a combination of water, ice, and dry ice. There's a lot of water remaining somewhere on Mars, and that's a real question. There probably is a lot of remaining water, but where is it? Now, one of our landers we put, I think, around 70 degrees north or so with a shovel on it. In fact, the engines that were firing to lower it gently to the surface blew off 3 or 4 inches of dirt and dust. Ice.
Oh, wow.
And we had another lander that I really don't have time to talk about, but we put a seismometer on Mars. Now, this is a trick question. Are there earthquakes on Mars? Thank you, yeah. You're ahead of the 5th graders by far. This seismometer was built by the French. It could detect a displacement the size of a hydrogen atom. The spacecraft was assembled in Denver by Lockheed Martin. It could detect the surf hitting the west coast of North America. In fact, when you talk to the people that build seismometers and try to do seismometry here on Earth, if you see plots of the noise that they're measuring all the time with these incredibly sensitive seismometers, the oceans worldwide drowned out the low-level noise that we would probably like to detect with these things to get a better understanding of the core of the Earth. We only had one seismometer with this lander, but it was very sensitive, and they would, in December of 2021, an orbiter found a brand new crater. And the lander people put their heads together and they discovered their seismometer detected the impact of that meteor, which dug out, I think this crater was like 150 feet in diameter or something, and it blew out chunks of ice. Hang around for a while and we'll see what we, what we find. And then when you get to the outer planets, Jupiter has 4 satellites named that Galileo discovered back in 1610. And he made the conclusion that these little dots of light are actually orbiting Jupiter. And he thought, wow, if they're orbiting Jupiter, I bet you Jupiter is orbiting the sun. And if Jupiter is orbiting the sun, so is Saturn, so is Mercury, so is Venus, so is Mars, and so is the Earth. But this did not go over too well with the Catholic Church, and he's been on house arrest until about 1996. I don't know why, but these Galilean satellites, we're going to fly a mission to Europa that will launch next year, next October. The consensus is there is probably a subsurface ocean on Europa that has more water than all of Earth. Europa is covered with ice. In fact, it looks like ice on the shores of lakes and things during the wintertime when it freezes and jams and ripples and all that kind of stuff. Europa is completely covered with things like that. And I better shut up. Tom has given me the signature to unplug, and of course the sound man can turn me off. Oh,
Can
Dale,
you
yeah.
describe Genesis 1 scientifically?
Define what?
Genesis 1. Give it to us in your language.
Yeah. Can I have 8 days? Well, realistically, I have a little problem with the story of Garden of Eden. And I will say story. It explains, it's a very good explanation of the pile of compost we're living in.
That's Genesis 3. What about 1?
The creation, the other thing, sorry Judy, he beat you to it. I salivate over Psalm 8. When I look at the heavens and the moon and the stars, what is man that thou art mindful of him? The creation is a wonderful explanation of how we all got here. And when I look at it very literally, somewhere in there it talks about, and there was the first day and the first night. That implies that the earth was not rotating. Not rotating, because if it's rotating, you have day and night. So something must have been set in motion. Now it's very interesting. Everything is rotating, revolving about something. The earth revolves around the sun with all the planets. The sun is revolving around the center of the Milky Way. The Milky Way is traveling in a group of local galaxies that's rotating about something or another. Everything is moving. Nothing is standing. Oh, maybe being a little too literal, when I read and the first day and the first night happened, then I have to, either all the clouds or now the earth is rotating. The other thing, we are not an accident. We are not an accident. I'm almost reminded of that very simplistically every Sunday when our organist plays the organ or the piano, and the mind that can compose and create. And you're telling me this was just an accident, that this was the result of evolution, that Mozart wrote things like that, Haydn? My God. I guess I can talk about that because this fellow no longer exists. He died, unfortunately, years ago. Profound member of the church. I have the utmost admiration for him. He believed we were the grand experiment, that there was life nowhere else in the universe. And every time we build a bigger telescope, the universe gets bigger. What were we expecting, a brick wall? So this couldn't just have happened. You know, it's kind of like expecting a bunch of monkeys to walk into a junkyard, have a 747 taxi out. So I probably haven't given you, and we've learned it's all right to doubt. Even though my name isn't Thomas, I'm allowed to doubt it. You can't fathom what must have happened. Scientists try to talk about the Big Bang when there was almost nothing, and then it became everything. Wow, that's not an accident either. It's interesting to stop and think. I think of maybe the whole animal kingdom. We're the only ones that can conceive the inconceivable. Don't you think? Do you think your dog ever ponders where the moon came from, or maybe where dinner came from? But I have a hard time getting in touch with my feelings, I'll admit that. And I have great compassion for the church. It took me a few years to come to grips with everything that they would let me in. I've been a Stephen minister for about 27 years. That's a great job because you don't have to fix anything. I'd like to think I've killed some care receivers with kindness. But I realize that God is inconceivable, and I'm trying to conceive what that must be. But his call to be there to walk humbly and for the common good, which is so desperately in arrears these days. I'm more concerned about the future of our country now than I ever was after 9/11. Hands down.
Yeah.
Well, this is a very serious, I wish maybe I had a better question for you, but when I look at the skies and the works of your hands, what is man that thou art mindful of him? Humans. Maybe that's more questions?
That's probably a good place to finish.
Or when the next freight leaves, so we get out of town?
No. Neil, we are so deeply, deeply grateful for this inspiring presentation and for the work that you and your colleagues continue to do. And these videos let us see a little bit of your handiwork. So thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon.
You're very
We're
welcome.
grateful. So just two announcements. This evening at dinner is the celebration of all the April birthdays. So if you have an April birthday, we will celebrate you over in the Rendezvous dining room. So please come on over for that. Melanie's prepared a special meal. And next Thursday at our convocation, my wife Suzette will be presenting, but this will be a bit of a different convocation in the sense that it's going to be an interactive piece with some workshop-like activities. So we will record it, but it won't be broadcast live. If you want to access this via YouTube, you can do that after it gets posted, but it won't be a live broadcast because of the nature of the format. Suzette, why don't you say a word about what you're going to do next week?
Okay, I said yes to be a fill-in when they needed a fill-in, so I'm it. And it's a topic that I've spoke about a lot of times with different age groups, and so it will be fun to do with people here. It's on change and transition and what it's like going through it, the variables that might affect your reaction to different change, how you've managed it in the past, what it means at this age, what are the ways that we react, and the areas that often will emerge during any kind of change, like issues of mattering, issues of belonging, competence. So we'll kind of go over those things, and as Terry said, I like to do things very interactively. Feel free to come if you just want to sit on your own and say nothing and talk to nobody, totally fine. But you might, if you'd like, turn and talk to somebody, and we'll do a little interactive piece on change and what's the good, the bad, the ugly, and what's the good news about change. So, next Thursday.
And Neil has provided a variety of things for you to take. We have two middle school granddaughters who have both taken courses in flight and space during this academic year, and they are absolutely fascinated. So, Neil, I have covered the table with everything you've got, and they're going to get shipped off to Bend, Oregon, and Spokane, Washington.
Good.
And we're going to sign them up for your email as well. So,
Okay. Thank
thanks
you.
once again, Neil, and thank you all for being here this afternoon.